gracious, most merciful, peace be upon you. I've been watching videos created by the Britain First group and their reasons for opposing Britain becoming part of the EU. What I found was they were mainly based on preventing immigration, and this alienates some people because they consider Britain First perhaps racist or fascist. In actual fact, the EU is a fascist dictatorship, and this is the theme that Britain First should play on when it's trying to get other people on board. And as I've said at the bottom of this slide, EU is a fascist dictatorship, and it has set itself up to be a false god for people who are ignorant. Britain First needs to adopt a more acceptable approach, the way Bush, Blair, Obama and Cameron are. They are quite clearly murderous dictators and want to murder brown people abroad, but they never say that we're going to kill brown people or non-white people abroad. No, they say that they're going to spread peace and democracy abroad when they actually go to murder populations across the world. So I would encourage Britain First to use similar tactics and articulate what they want in a better way, not saying that they're against immigration, but consider other more better reasons to be exiting Europe. Britain First actually need to learn the real reasons that the EU is a bad idea. Now, I've listened to a Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, who's in that picture, and he has a PhD, so he's quite an educated guy. He's worked in top positions within American government, and he's now a journalist. And he's actually got very sensible reasons why Britain should exit the EU. And you can watch his interview, it's about an hour long, and I've tried to condense it in the following slides. Okay, so he claims that the CIA created the fascist EU, and a gentleman called Joshua Paul found documents released from archives, and the memos were reported in 2000 in I think it was the Telegraph newspaper. Yeah, it is. I've got a screen print of the article, and the link to the article will be below. And this 3 that I've got in brackets is the time in the interview that I've watched. So if you want to hear this part of the interview, you can go to 3 minutes and see when the gentleman talks about it. So he also says that the reason why CIA set up the EU was because they could control many governments simultaneously. If all the European governments were under the EU, then the US find it easier to bribe one person or a few people within the EU than have to deal with many different European governments. And this is also why the murderous US push to get Eastern Europe into NATO and the fascist EU, so that they can again control many governments simultaneously. And there's satanic imagery linked with the EU, and here we've got the goddess Europa riding a bull, and that's also got negative connotations within the Bible, I believe, with some whore of Babylon riding the beast. The people of Britain are lied to by the politicians of Britain. We are told that if we leave EU, we will be insignificant in Europe. That is false. We have never been insignificant in Europe, and I don't believe we will be. We are also told that we're being negotiated special conditions, which is also false, as the gentleman that I talked about says in his interview. We are manipulated. We're told that if we leave, it will be disastrous. These are all lies. Now, Britain is not currently part of the EU. We still have power, and we have our own central bank and currency. Other countries do no longer have central banks. They only have the fascist EU central bank, and the former Goldman Sachs fascist murderous executive run the fascist EU, and they also run the US Treasury, the Federal Reserve, which has become a private bank for these fascist executives. Okay, so this is, he claims in his interview that the fascist EU will destroy Britain's sovereignty. He says that we're safe at the moment because the fascist EU bankers can't make you get rid of public assets and selling them to private investors, but gradually, as we are sucked into the system, we will lose our rights and lose justice. He says this at 1 minute 40 seconds if you choose to watch the video yourself. In Europe, people do not have rights. They're losing their rights. The murderous US will urge the process along in the UK as fascist EU destroys sovereignty. And sometimes we're told that we will be penalised in terms of trade, but that is again false, because the entire world trades without the EU. Right, so the EU is like a monarchy. They are not elected. The people cannot make the government accountable to their decisions or deeds. They're ruled by aristocrats, which are really rich people who do as they please, and the individual nationalities will disappear. It is actually set up as a dictatorship, as indicated by the diagram to the left. Now, he says in his interview that Britain should leave this fascist EU structure, which is hierarchical and designed to produce dictatorship similar to the US. There are laws being passed that the people don't know about, they're not allowed to vote on, and America has become a dictatorship, and they want Britain to be part of the fascist EU dictatorship. And in his interview, he says that we should save the world actually by exiting, because it is likely that other countries will also follow, because they are suffering. For instance, Greece is suffering because it's being looted. Okay, on to this slide. US forces EU into conflicts. Yes, so we're being forced into conflicts. For instance, the murderous US falsely complain about Russia and China all the time. They are constantly building up forces around Russia and China, and NATO and EU make it easier for the US to threaten other countries, because, as I said earlier, it's easier for them to deal with one group of people in power rather than speak to individual different countries. And he also said in his interview at 27 minutes 38 that the US uses NATO as a cover for war crimes committed in Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Pakistan, etc. So the Europeans are enabling murderous US to cause wars and create the refugee crisis. Refugees would not be coming into Europe if it wasn't for the fact that murderous US is going around bombing the world and its people. Right, so here I've titled this slide, Fascist EU Needs to Tell Gutter Elite Corporations in Murderous US Where to Go. Yes, he also talks about how we could have good relations with Russia. The Europeans are doing business with Russia, and we don't need to jump on the bandwagon of US and corporate America to support their wars and support their crimes just because they have the greed wanting to take over more and more lands and resources. The fact that we voted out of the EU has actually reduced the risk of war, not increased it, because with the power of EU behind America, it can go and start wars with other countries. So, because we haven't got independent rulers, they struggle to say no to US, and the more independent and separate we come, the less likely that we will jump on their bully boy bandwagon. The gutter elite corporations want to enslave us, and EU and Brussels supports this. Around the headquarters in Brussels, there are many corporations with their bases, and they lobby the executives there who have no respect for democracy. They are putting forward laws that we are not being told about. For instance, there's a company called Monsanto who is always lying and trying to sell us harmful products. For instance, they try to feed us genetically modified foods. Now, Europe has always been quite opposed to genetically modified foods because they are just fake foods and fake crops that struggle to grow, and unless you buy the chemicals from Monsanto to keep them thriving, so they're very expensive and harmful to the environment because they infect the other crops. Now, France has been against this these genetically modified products, but they are in the process of making laws that will allow them to sue France for loss of revenue if they're not allowed to sell their product. And these fascist corporate elite, they want they don't want their fake products being labeled. If they want to put Caucasian white female babies in food, they don't want to have to label that they have put these babies in the food. And if they want to genetically modify food, they don't want to label it because they want us to buy these foods in ignorance. And they actually will use Muslims as a scapegoat, saying, oh, the Muslims don't want halal meat to be labeled. I'll be honest with you, halal meat is a more purer, wholesome meat than other meats. So is kosher, because the blood is allowed to flow out. And I think you have to be a pretty special person to be eating halal meat. Uh, if you don't want to eat halal meat, it's a high quality, more expensive product, and I want you to be eating your junk, whichever you want to eat. Okay, because I want the high quality meat for myself. I want my halal meat labeled because it's a quality product. Anyway, going on to the gutter elite corporations, they don't care about you. All they care about is their profits. They want health and safety regulations to be removed so that they can purely work for their profits. They want the NHS removed so they can get their own profiting private healthcare businesses in. So, according to the interview, the gentleman actually states that Britain will disappear and aggression and towards Russia and wars will increase if Britain remains in the EU. In fact, he says that a German editor of a German newspaper admitted that he was a CIA agent, and he published whatever CIA told him to publish, and that this was true for every European newspaper. They publish lies. And as I stated earlier, and he states in his interview, that Greece is being looted. He states this at 48 minutes. The corporate elite, IMF and World Bank, use debt to loot countries, and before they were just looting developing countries. Now they're looting European countries as well. So what will happen, according to this gentleman, if we exit the fascist EU? Well, this will mean an end to the transatlantic trade and investment partnership, and I've underlined what the TTIP means. It tries to reduce the regulatory barriers to trade for big business things like food safety law, environmental legislation, banking regulations, and the sovereign powers of individual nations. So it actually reduces all these things, and it's an assault on European and US societies by the corporate elite. So British people will actually be doing the whole world a favour if they leave the EU. So again, a bit more about what will happen if we leave the EU. Um, Washington, murderous America, will try to prevent us from leaving, and the Goldman Sachs Corporation, which runs the Federal Reserve, will try to bring down the value of the pound. So this is what we will see. Um, but the alternative to this is that Greece, Italy, Portugal, etc., the countries that will be targeted for looting or are being targeted for looting, might decide to leave. Further, we might suffer false flags that are carried out by the CIA and the Zionist organizations such as Mossad. What else will happen if we leave EU? The gentleman talks a little bit about Operation Gladio, which took place in Italy and other European countries, which involved CIA and NATO leaving behind armies or terrorists who bombed the people. They bombed train stations and other places to achieve political goals, and they were blamed on the bombings were blamed on terrorist organizations in the same way that Muslims are being blamed today. But in actual fact, they were part of the CIA, Mossad, NATO operatives. And I've got a link here that you can go to and see more detailed information and references about Operation Gladio. The murderous US wants to rule the world, and when the USSR collapsed years ago, they thought the neoconservatives thought that there was a real chance for them to take over the world, and this is what they have been working towards through NATO and the fascist EU. And as I said, they want to aggress against Russia and China all the time in order to take over the world. And the Bush family are also part of this whole Zionist corporate elite network. They have their hands in many corporations, and here we have a quote from the ex-American president, George Bush Sr. He said that if the American people were to ever find out what we have done, we would be chased down the streets and lynched. And I do believe a time will come that these gutter elite will be lynched. God help them, because of the evils that they've committed around the world. I pray that you are guided, that God protects you and gives you peace and guides you to the truth and all that is written below the slide. Allahu Akbar and Ameen.